Okay, I think I'm going to go ahead and get started because we do have a limited time this morning. Good morning or good evening, depending on location you're logging in. Welcome again to the first of the three to four seminar series commemorating 10 years anniversary of Operation Tomodachi. This project was made possible with the collaboration of the Embassy of Japan and Stimson Center. So we would like to thank Embassy of Japan for their collaboration with us. Starting off this series, I'm very honored to have two very distinguished guests as our panelists this morning or this evening if you're logging in from Asia. From the U.S. side, we have Vice Admiral Scott Van Buskirk, who retired as the director of the personnel at the Navy staff, but prior to that, he was actually serving as a commander of the 7th Fleet when Operation Tomodachi first went underway. From Japan, we have Vice Admiral Hiromi Takashima, who has served as the commander of the JMSDF Yokosuka District and worked very closely with the 7th Fleet and also Japan Ministry of Defense Home Ministry to execute Operation Tomodachi. So I'm very, very happy that these two distinguished Navy officers were able to join us this morning. First, let me explain a couple of ground rules. Please mute yourself while speakers are speaking. And we do have the simultaneous interpretation function for this webinar. So if you can click the interpreter or interpretation, you would see the icon of English and Japanese. Please click the language of the output language that you want to listen to. So if you would like to listen everything in Japanese, please click Japanese. If you want to listen everything in English, please click English. During the Q&A session, I would use the I would only look at the another icon that says Q&A. So any question you may have for the speaker, please type it on the Q&A, and I would try to capture as many questions as possible. So with that, I would like to get started. Admiral Van Buskirk, Admiral Takashima, welcome. Let me first start off this session by asking you, what is the thing that you most vividly remember about Operation Tomodachi and the whole experience, and what are the things that you got out of that experience working closely Navy to Navy between Japan and the United States? Let me start with you, Admiral Takashima, and then I will move on to Admiral Van Buskirk.
皆さんおはようございます。こんばんは。日本の方にはこんばんは。高島でございます。よろしくお願いします。東日本大震災、すなわち今日のテーマはトモダチ作戦ですけれども、我々にとって最も困難だったのはですね、福島第一原発の問題です。具体的には原子炉の冷却水が足りないということでした。で、これ本来は近くのダムから水を取り込んでいたんですけれども、これが津波、地震の影響でですね、入ってきてないということでした。で、政府の官邸の対策室におきましてですね、山側から給水できないんであれば、海側から持っていこうという話になりました。で、おそらくバンマックさんはご存知だと思いますが、この提案されたのは米軍だと思っております。で、具体的には、我々に与えられた任務はですね、およそ横須賀から原発まで200マイル、ノーティカルマイル200ノーティカルマイルなんですが、これをですね、アメリカ海軍が持っている真水用のバージ、 これ1300トンと1500トンだったんですが、これをアメリカ海軍が日本に提供すると。で、我々はこれを曳航してですね、引っ張ってですね、原発の真下まで持っていけと。これが我々に与えられたミッションでした。で、我々にとって何が最大の問題だったのかと言いますと、敵の情報が全くなかった。敵というのはですね、一つは、原発周辺の放射線量がどのぐらいあるのか、それから原発の下に小さな港があるんですが、ここの海水の汚染度がどの程度なのか、この重要な情報がですね、我々には全くありませんでした。従いまして、原発の下まで行かせる隊員にですね、任務に従事する隊員が汚染する可能性があったということなんですね。この経緯の話も長いんですけども、ちょっと端折って言いますが、要するに我々にとりまして、敵の能力に関する情報がないままにですね、ないと、これは作戦計画が成り立ちません。これは無謀ということになります。しかしながら、大臣命令は下りました。ミッションのですね。で、加えて、これはアメリカ軍の情報なんですが、福島の原発はあと3日しか持たないという情報が私のところに入ってきました。従いまして、我々は時間との戦いであったわけですね。我々は司令部ヘッドクォーターのキーメンバー、主要メンバーだけでですね、集まって作戦の概要を決めました。具体的には誰にこの任務をやらせるのか、参加部隊はどこか、で指揮官を誰にするのか、でそれから具体的な部隊の動きをどうするのかということですよね。これを徹夜でですね、物的、人的、物の準備と人の準備をしたような状況でした。そして、結果的に、大臣命令を受領してから半日後にはですね、行動を開始することができました。行動開始というのは、横須賀のアメリカ海軍基地からですね、バージの曳航を開始したということでございます。で、これ結果論なんですけども、結果からいきますと、現地、原発の直下ですね、原子力発電所の真下の放射線量が許容値内でありましたので、なんとか任務を遂行できたということですね。で、ひとえにこの任務を達成できたのはですね、ひとえに、参加者、特に原発の真下まで真水を持っていった隊員のですね、使命感に尽きるというふうに私は考えております。以上です。
Thank you, Admiral Takashima. Admiral Buskirk?
Well, first of all, let me take a moment to thank you, Yuki, and Pam, and the Stimson Center and the Embassy of Japan for hosting this event. It's great. I think these are really critical conversations we can have that go towards strengthening the U.S.-Japan relationship. So again, thank you. First, a couple of points on the challenges that the most challenging aspects of the operation. I think first and foremost was the immense scope and magnitude of the disaster itself. It was extremely challenging and a complex humanitarian disaster. People have to remember we were coordinating, our two nations were coordinating and conducting operations associated with 3 disasters at once. You had the earthquake, the tsunami, and an unfolding nuclear and radiological crisis. And all this was made more complicated by the harsh winter conditions. You may remember it was snowing, it was cold. And so the people that were impacted were facing some very harsh environmental conditions in addition to all of the other aspects of the crisis. I think one of the key points for both of us was, both of our nations, was determining the exact extent of the radiological, the Fukushima Daiichi damage and the impact in order to help us bound the response plan. That was hard initially, but I think we were able to do that quite successfully. Also, all of our families were impacted. This was very unique. This wasn't like where the United States, at least, to where we would go to the area of a disaster, let's say, and to render assistance. In this case, we were impacted just as much as the Japan, to some extent, because of all of our basing, that is forward basing, that was located there in Yokosuka, in Misawa, Atsugi, and all of our families who lived there were impacted as well. So this disaster occurred where we worked and where we lived. So both of us were fighting this disaster while our families were being dislocated, and so that was something we had to consider as we were working through it. And then also, I think it was a unique problem, was ensuring that the media really captured what was going on with the operation and its impact. And I can talk a little bit more about that. That was a unique thing. So what really I think is important is what we got out of this experience. And certainly it was a validation of how important and strong our alliance is. We were celebrating the 60th anniversary of our alliance that year. And this really solidified how well we work together, how well we rely on each other, and really how, we really are brothers and sisters in arms together. It's no doubt that our alliance is the cornerstone of peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific region. And it's critical to regional engagement. And this disaster really solidified what our relationship was all about. It was more than just about defense of our nations. It really was about being friends, and hence Tomodachi. I got the utmost satisfaction and gratification seeing firsthand how our two defense forces work together. We had exercised together for years, for decades. And in this instance, it was a seamless interoperability that I think we were able to, which was critical, to successfully working through these three simultaneous disasters. We had Takashima-san and myself and Admiral Kuromoto had taken the time over the previous year to actually integrate our staffs, something that had not happened before. We actually had liaison officers in each other's operational commands. And those liaison officers were critical to ensuring that information flowed freely. And I think it also reminded me how important personal relationships are between our two nations. I was able to pick up the phone and call Takashima-san, call Kuromoto-san, just because we worked together daily. We had that relationship where we could just pick up the phone and talk to one another, as did our subordinates as well, because that's the type of relationship we had. And there was some unique things. It was a reminder that helicopter capability matters, as both of our nations found. That was the most important asset and capability that we both shared. And the ability to operate at nighttime under difficult all-weather conditions was really key. And I think it was also, finally, was uniquely, both of our maritime forces were able to apply what we would do in wartime to a peacetime disaster response situation. We employed those processes, whether that was intel gathering, whether that was photographic recon, whether it was the command centers that we mobilized. In our case, we mobilized our reserve component from Texas, which is tied very closely in with our staff, and they met us off the coast of Okinawa. So we just followed we did the things that we had trained to do, and I think the interoperability was really stood out of how well our two nations work together.
Thank you both for your thoughtful reflections of the operations. Let me fast forward to today's situation. The ongoing COVID-19 situation is, as we all know, is a reminder that the next complex disaster, such as the Great Eastern Japan earthquake, could be complicated further by pandemic, should something like that happen. Do you think the U.S. Navy or Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Forces, respectively, equipped with addressing these potential operational challenge that can be posed by pandemic? Let me start with you, Admiral Van Buskirk.
Yes, to answer that question, I think we're certainly much better prepared. I think we have many lessons learned. Unfortunately, many of them we've learned the hard way. Certainly, with the issue we had with our aircraft carrier early on, in discovering what we needed to do in terms of command and control, and when faced with this type of pandemic, we had some hard lessons learned from the United States Navy side. That said, I think those are going to be invaluable as we go forward. We now have experience in establishing, testing, and validating protocols, and we know what works. I think we were able to conduct, despite its severe impact, to not only forward deployed forces and force on home base, but to the people who man the watch centers and who do the day-to-day business of the defense work in protecting our country, whether that's Marines, airmen, sailors, Coast Guardmen in our case, soldiers. We now have experience in this, and we've proven from the Navy side of the house, at least, that the deployment cycle works. It's flexible enough to mitigate the impacts of something like this, and we could continue operations. I don't think you've heard of any operations worldwide which have been, at least from a military sense, which have been, completely stymied or halted or severely impacted. We've been able to work through it. And I think the last thing is that our forward presence, our things like the alliance we have with the great alliance we have with Japan, the ability to be forward based, share basing, the partnerships that we have, host nation agreements. All these things are critical and enablers for our nations to work together to where if we have a shortfall, if we were impacted, we know we could rely on the JMSDF, the Kaijo Jetai, to be there for us if we need that support, and they know that they could rely on us as well. And that is not something you get overnight. That's something you get through long-standing relationships and working together. So I think we're well postured. Hopefully it will never happen again. And hopefully as the pandemic turns to an endemic, we will be well positioned in the future. But the answer to your question is yes. I think that we're better prepared.
Thank you, Admiral. Admiral Takashima.
はい。ですね、東日本大震災の時に、私と第7艦隊司令官、バンバスカーク中将はですね、毎晩のように夜ですね、電話で、連絡し、調整をしておりましたことをですね、付け加えさせていただきます。そして先ほど司会の方が言われましたような事態ですね、複合的な災害があって、加えて、現在のようなコロナの災禍、パンデミックがあった場合、海上自衛隊の体制は どのようになっているのかというご関門だったと思うんですが、これは東日本大震災を経験した一人としてですね、現在私が最も恐れている事態ですね。今年の初めにコロナの問題が起きましたけれども、私は今この時期にですね、かつてのような大震災がないこと、起きないことをですね、本当に祈るような気持ちで、過ごしております。先ほど万博さんが言われましたように、我々二国間、特に自衛隊と米軍はもちろんですけれども、特にアメリカ海軍と海上自衛隊の連携は緊密になされております。それはもう昔からかつても現在もおそらく将来も変わらないと思います。本当に私はアメリカが唯一の同盟国でよかったというふうに考えております。で、さて、海上自衛隊の体制の問題ですけれども、これはですね、現役の仕事でありますので、すでに退役した私が経験には言えないんですけれども、例えば、もし足りないとすればですね、貿易を防ぐですね、貿易の体制などはですね、まだ充実させていく必要があるというふうに考えております。ただし、陸上での被災者の救援等は、陸上で起こることについてはですね、これは一義的に陸上自衛隊が担います。したがって、我々に与えられる任務は、おそらく被災者とか、あるいは物資のですね、輸送、これが主任務になるのではないかというふうに考えております。そのためには、その任務には大型の輸送艦でありますとか、補給艦でありますとか、あるいは空母タイプの護衛艦でありますとか、これらをですね、投入する準備はですね、もう今日にもできているというふうに確信しております。加えてですね、我々には本当に第7艦隊、アメリカ海軍という非常に強い味方がおりますので、アメリカ海軍の協力を得ながらですね、常に連携しながら対処していくということになるかと思います。以上です。
Thank you very much, Admiral. Now I would like to start taking questions from the audience. First question comes from Mr. Paul Sullivan. I think this is to both of you. So whoever would like to pitch in, please feel free to do so. So his question is, how important was it to have real-time accurate information on what was happening to figure out your next steps during the operation? Was there any inaccurate information that got in the way and that made your decisions difficult? Perhaps maybe I would start from you, perhaps Admiral Takashima, and then I ask Admiral Van Buskirk if he would like to add something.
本当に言われる通りでですね、リアルタイムで、正確な情報を得るというのは、これはもう軍事作戦にとってもう必須の要件ですね。だから最初のところで私、敵の情報がなかったと言いますが、放射線路の情報がなかった、海水の汚染度の情報がなかった、これは本当にですね、苦しい思いをしました。しかし、その中で、隊員を任務に生かせなければいけないという非常に苦しい胸の内があったわけですね。ですから、本当に情報というのは、もう我々の作戦には決して欠くことのできない大変重要な要素ですよね。それはもちろん分かってるんですけれども、なかなかそれがですね、リアルタイムで、入ってこないという辛いところもあります。ただ、 人頼みではいけないんですけれども、我々は我々なりの努力をするんですけれども、それでも足りないところ、助けてもらうところはですね、非常に世界第一級の海軍であるアメリカ海軍が同盟国でありますので、アメリカ海軍からいろいろな情報をいただきながらですね、我々はもちろん我々の持っている情報を提供して、作戦を遂行した東日本大震災においてもですね、従来通り全くそれまでと我々が訓練してきたのと同じようにですね、スムーズに作戦ができたというふうに考えております。ただし、何回も言いますが、原発の問題についてはですね、なかなか正確な情報が得ることができませんで、大変苦労した思いがあります。以上です。
Do you have anything to add, Admiral Van Buskirk?
Well, I think certainly, as I mentioned in the opening, from your opening question, determining accurately or with any confidence the exact extent of the nuclear radiological impact of the Fukushima Daiichi damage was one of the most important things for us to do. I think what everybody should know, the United States has its most capable military assets forward based in and around Japan. That's where we put our best capability, our newest capability. So we had at our fingertips the best possible photo reconnaissance capability, atmosphere monitoring capability. And in fact, ironically, because we have nuclear warships, in this case to George Washington, forward based in Japan, we have quite a bit of nuclear experience in the region. I'm nuclear trained. I was as a submariner. Admiral Willard, in charge of PACOM at the time, nuclear trained. Admiral Robert Thomas, who became 7th Fleet Commander, nuclear trained. So we were not unfamiliar with working around radiological situations, and familiar with the monitoring that has to go on, the precautions that have to go on. So I think that helped us. It helped Japan. It helped us work together better since we understood the type of environment we could be in. But there was a lot of uncertainty associated with Fukushima because of the changing weather, wind patterns, determining the extent, the damage from an atmosphere in the water as well. So that was difficult. I think we worked through that well together. There's many lessons learned from that. But that was probably the most challenging aspect of getting accurate information in a difficult surrounding crisis environment.
Thank you. I think this issue of criticality of the information seemed to spike a great deal of interest in the audience. So there are several questions that are on that thrust. So let me try to group them together. So there's one from Kevin Mayer, who was a State Department Task Force coordinator back in Washington when this thing was unfolding. Scott, you should be familiar. Good morning, Kevin. So his question was that he saw an internal USG issue that sometimes internal inaccurate back channel information caused great confusions, and sometimes, because of the sensitivity of the accident, for example, for nuclear meltdown, near panic situation, greatly exaggerating the radiological threat. So did things like this impact, Scott, like the 7th Fleet's operation, or your decision and what next step to take? And I guess for both of you, do you feel that you have both U.S. Navy and the JMSDF respectively have enough capacity to monitor and assess assess the radiological aspect of a situation. I think it was back then. And if there were any lessons learned, do you think that current day U.S. Navy and JMSDF has really learned from that lesson and have a better capacity to assess and monitor those types of accidents should, God forbid, should something like that happen again? Yeah, I'll start from you, Scott.
I think a great question. A lot of questions in there. I think that are embedded there. We have again, because we had nuclear warships involved in this, both the George Washington, the Ronald Reagan, and a lot of nuclear trained people, that we could we were comfortable working in that environment. What's difficult is for a radiological problem that we've had experience in the world is for the pub to be able to explain to the public the impact that they are seeing, because it's invisible, right? It's not tangible. It's something you can taste, you smell, or feel. It's radiation exposure that's of concern. So it's being able to tell the public in terms that they can understand what the impact is, and that they would understand. Like I think one of them that was used in this case was the fact that, hey, the exposure people were seeing was no more than people who live in Colorado receive during a period of time. In other words, where you can receive the most exposure because of your height and altitude, or that you would receive from an X-ray or 2 X-rays, so people can understand what the impact it was to them and their families and the people around them. So that is a difficult thing to do in this type of situation. But I think that was important to get that out there, to relieve the fears and to put it in terms that people could understand. So having that accurate information to base that on was a challenge, because it's a 360-degree problem. It's wind dependent. It's water, what's in the water column, which may have been going out into the ocean. So it's a multi-dynamic and complex problem that requires a lot of different monitoring capability. And to get that there in the near where the crisis was occurring was very important. And it took some time to do that. We had our monitoring on board our ships because of the nuclear aspect that we're used to operating in. And I think that helped us get a handle on it early on. So I think that I'll stop there and leave it at that. From that, I have one aspect to add, to let Takashima-san to say something as well.
Admiral Takashima, do you have additional comments to what the Admiral Van Buskirk just said?
はい、ご存知の通り、日本の海上自衛隊ではですね、原子力潜水艦も原子力空母もありません。原子力推進のビークルはありません。従いまして、我々にはその原子力に対する知識というのがですね、格段に乏しいということになります。加えて、政治的にも原子力の問題は大変ナイーブな問題であるという状況にありますですね。したがって我々の知識には限りがある。そういう状況で、しかし任務は遂行しなければならないということで、多くのモニターのデータでありますとか、さまざまな放射線量に関する情報をですね、第7艦隊をはじめアメリカ海軍あるいは米軍からですねいただきながら、それを我々も分析して 任務を遂行しなければいけない。被災民の治癒というのは、これはもう我々が一時的にやる、日本人が日本人をですね、救援すると当然のことでありますので、いろいろな情報をですね、いただいた情報を加味しながら、我々の許される範囲の中でですね、任務を遂行したということですね。
Thank you both. There's also a couple of questions regarding what may be the biggest lessons that each of you learned by being involved in Operation Tomodachi. Were there something that you looked back now and think I could have done some certain things differently? If I had done something differently, that must have been more helpful to execute the operations. So what was the biggest lessons learned from your involvement in the Operation Tomodachi? I would start from you this time, Admiral Takashima, and then turn to Admiral Buskirk.
はい。ちょっとですね、混乱があるかもわかりませんが、我々が友達作戦と称しますと、呼びますと、これは東日本大震災におけるアメリカ軍と自衛隊との共同作戦、これを友達作戦と呼んでおります。日本ではですね。で、東日本大震災全体の我々がやった救援作業は友達作戦とは我々はですね言っておりませんので、ちょっとそこのところを混乱されないようにお願いしたいと思います。
So I guess my question is that your experience with working with the U.S. Navy, I think that aspect, if you can just focus your comment on what lessons you might have learned from that experience, that would be great.
はい。ですね、まず最初に、アメリカの司令官から聞いたんですが、アメリカ海軍はまず最初に震災が起きると直ちにですね、飛行機を飛ばして何十万枚というですね、写真を被災地の写真を撮っておられたんですね。それを空母に持ち帰って、情報の専門家が分析するという作業をやられたそうです。で、彼らは小さな村の名前だとか、どこが被災しているとか、どこで被災者が孤立しているとか、基本的には知らないはずなんですね。我々はもう何十隻という船や飛行機を使ってですね、現地の状況を調査したんですが、彼らは最初に撮った写真を分析してですね、ほとんど我々と同じレベルのですね、情報を持っておりました。そして、友達作戦が開始になると、ピンポイントでですね、何々村、あるいは何々村、ここで人が孤立しているというところは彼らは分かってますから、そこにピンポイントで救援物資を持っていくんですね。これすなわち、いろいろ最初から問題出ておりますように、情報の重要性ですね。これを私は本当にアメリカ海軍の能力をですね、つぶさに見せていただきました。はい。
Admiral Buskirk, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, a couple of points. So one I was trying to make earlier is the value of liaison officers. We had invested in that between our two navies, our fleets and our fleet headquarters. I don't think you can do enough of that. I think that's a lesson learned. More interoperability, more information sharing is better. Plain and simple. And we need to continue to be mindful about that and continue, even though it's difficult sometimes with different clearances, but continue to invest in that. I think the other thing we both found out is while we as defense forces, we look to how we interact with other nations. Sometimes we don't realize how difficult it can be to interact with our own agencies in our own home countries. And we may not have those relationships built, whether that's between the Navy and the Department of Energy. It would seem we do have a relationship there, but maybe we need to invest more in that. And similarly, in Japan, between the defense forces and some of the civilian agencies that, in this case, you can't prepare for everything, but certainly it exposed to where we could have maybe had some better processes in place. So I think it's, sometimes you need to think out of the box. And I think it's hard, but it's the value of having good relationships with the media, and continuing to allow them access so that they can tell the story and help the public understand what's going on is critically important. We have a long history of that because of the Gulf Wars and Iraq and Iran, to where we're comfortable with embedding the media. And in fact, the media knows that their quickest way to the crisis to be able to get there is by being with the military, because we have that lift capability. We have the helicopters to get people there. But to ensure once they're there that they can tell the story is really critical. So allowing that access, I think, is important. It's hard because they can, you never know what's going to occur, what story they're exactly going to tell. But it's critically important from a communications to the public for them to see firsthand and to understand, maybe become more comfortable with the information that's coming out.
Thank you both. Based on Admiral Van Buskirk's comment he just made, and I think I can get back to you on that, Admiral Takashima, as well, is that there are a couple of questions kind of revolving around that theme. That first question is, did both of you have clear understanding between the relationship between local, state, national, and international authorities who are involved in this Operation Tomodachi, more focused on Operation Tomodachi? And also there was another question that was actually from Admiral Keating, by the way. And and there was another question from Mr. John Robinson. That is for both of you. Would it be possible for both of you to talk a little bit more about how you coordinated with relevant civil authorities in the relief effort? So with that, I think I would. I know Admiral Takashima has something to add, responding to Admiral Van Buskirk's comments. So first, I'll turn him to that, and if Admiral Takashima can and have some answers to the other two questions that I just posed to you, I'll really appreciate it, and then I'll come back to you, Scott.
Sure.
はい。ですね、政府とか自治体と我々の関係なんですが、まず政府との関係はですね、東京には防衛省があります。で、防衛省の同じ敷地内に陸海空自衛隊のヘッドクォーターがあります。そこで、その陸海空自衛隊のトップと防衛省の官僚、それが、政府の窓口になります。したがって私は現地の、出先の部隊指揮官ですので、中央の政府の動きはですね、市ヶ谷の防衛省、あるいは海上自衛隊の総司令部を海上幕僚監部といいますが、こちらを通じてですね、私のところにいろんな政府の動きはもらっておりました。で、自治体との関係はですね、海自衛隊の場合はそれほどの大きな関係はありません。基本的には、自治体との調整はですね、陸上自衛隊がやっておりましたので、もちろん被災者の救助で、小さな調整事項はありますけれども、大きく自治体と何か関係してやるというところはですね、特にありませんでした。はい。
Admiral Van Buskirk?
Well, yeah, this is a really good question, and I'll be able to personally thank Admiral Keating for that question, because since he lives right around the corner from me.
Okay.
No, but it really is, because we had I think from the United States standpoint, we didn't quite understand in terms of the Japanese government hierarchy, the really how prefectures work, and how that because we were dealing with different prefectures that were impacted in this case by the crisis, and each prefecture is different, and how Japan nationally provides support to the prefectures. I don't think we quite understood. So what I mean with why that's important is when you look at our involvement in Iraq, Afghanistan, oftentimes we think about the government we're going to interact with, but we forget about, in the case of Iraq, the province government, the governments that are there, how critically important they are when you're going to be operating in those areas. Similarly, I mean, in Japan, we did not have that good understanding. So the lesson learned there would be for people is to think about that and get the experts, because that experience or expertise is not going to probably reside in your own staff. But that's why liaison officers are critical. Elicit that information, or trying to get that information from those people, or get the right people in quickly, and think about that dynamic so that you don't make a critical error early on that's difficult to recover from in your response. So that local government, state, and the level above it is just as important to understand in some situation as is the national. And certainly we're more comfortable at the national level or our own Navy to Navy level. But understanding that other dynamic, I think, is critically important, and a really good point, no matter what situation you're in, whether it's wartime, humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, peacetime operations. So that's a wise investment that you need to make and think through.
Thank you both. Based on that, there were also a couple of questions. As you remember, this is really the first time that bilateral coordination cell has been established in the 3 different places, Yokota, Ichigaya, and Sendai. And so there were a couple of questions that are remaining to that. And also Scott talked about the importance of liaison officers. So one question was, what was how well do you think it worked? This bilateral coordination task action team, VCAT, I think we used to call it, worked in relations in the context of you're executing your component, the naval component of your mission. And the second question is, if you can, both of you can talk a little bit more about the importance of a command and control in the operational space like this, especially when, like both Scott and Takashima-san mentioned, not only you have the channel, Navy to Navy channel, but then different services of each armed forces had different function and different role in this bigger relief effort. So if both of you can talk a little bit to that, I'll greatly appreciate it. So I'll start with Scott and then turn back to Takashima-san.
Well, interestingly, we had just in, I think, November, December timeframe, exercise the joint, this type of joint interoperability through a regular exercise series we do. I think Keen Sword that had been done, in, I think it was even as December. So we had just come off where we had worked working with the Japan Self-Defense Forces, this joint interoperability involving multi-services and 2 nations. And it was something we were continuing to work on. It's nothing, we don't have that figured out, probably never will. It's difficult to do that. So it was, and you mentioned this, that Sendai and, in the different locations where Yokota, where we had these, interoperability going on. That was, the the first time ever having to operationalize that, I think, for real, rather than exercise environment. But that points to how important exercising is to go through and work. So I think watching that and participating in it, I think it worked out. It worked out really well. Not to say there weren't some issues in it, but I think that's critical. The other thing is, our staffs mobilized to support this, but there's lots of other things going on in the world. There was things going on with North Korea at the time. There's other operations going on. So from to get to that command and control question, it was important to bring in another staff that could dedicate itself to really providing the overarching command and control. In this case, it was Admiral Walsh coming in, being designated, who was the Pacific Fleet commander, but being designated to come in and providing it from the United States standpoint, a four-star with the staff to be able to now help in the region, really take off some of the pressure from the operational commands that stood up. Our command, which stood up on the Blue Ridge, which is what it's designed to do. That's ship that's singularly designed to be a command and control platform. That came natural for us to do that. But we had other operations to manage in the world. And so thinking through and to provide that other staff in there to do that, just like the Japan Self-Defense Forces did, providing that overarching designated staff to really be the go-to echelon of command that people know to interact with, and then to communicate from, to have that responsibility was very, very important.
よろしいですか。はい、自衛隊のことから申し上げますと、これほどの大きな作戦でやったのは初めてなんです。自衛隊として初めてなんですが、自衛隊もジョイントタスクフォース、統合任務部隊を編成して任務に当たりました。これがですね、大変うまく機能したし、良かったと思います。今、統合は時代の流れではありますけれども、初めて大規模な作戦をですね、実際の任務として、統合部隊を組んで、やったと。自衛隊の3自衛隊が統合してやったというのは大変作戦がですね、うまくいった、円滑にいった一つの要因だというふうに考えております。ジョイントタスクフォースのコマンダーは指揮官は陸上自衛隊の総監がやりまして、私はその下についた形になります。で、政府統合、米軍との関係で言いますと、市ヶ谷の自衛隊の統合幕僚監部と横田にできた統合の司令部、これがですね、大変うまく連携してくれまして、そこから降りてくるいろんな情報、あるいは任務をですね、我々がやったということになります。したがって、この作戦は本当にうまくいったというふうに考えております。万博さんがたびたび言及されておりますように、リエゾンオフィサーの連絡官の交換ですね、本当に具体的なことを申し上げますと、アメリカジョージ・ワシントンが震災の翌々日の朝にはもう三陸沖に到着してくれておりましたけれども、まず最初にですね、私の現地に派遣している部下と、それから空母任務軍指揮官が会いまして、調整会議をやりまして、その場でですね、大佐クラスのリエゾンを交換しようということで、我々の海上自衛隊の一等海佐が空母に乗り込み、そしてアメリカ海軍の大佐の方がですね、我々の船に乗って、お互いにその指揮官と指揮官、幕僚と調整をしながらですね、情報交換をしながら、友達作戦を遂行したということです。これの役割はですね、大変大きかったと いうふうに思っております。でも私は終始横須賀の司令部で指揮を取ったんですけれども、友達作戦の実際の現場の作戦はですね、すべて私が現地に派遣している部下に任せまして、私はテレビで VTC で彼らが毎日会議やっているのをですね、モニターしておったという状況です。特に私がですね、横から口を挟むようなことはありませんでした。大変助けられたし、うまくいったというふうに考えております。以上です。
Thank you. So this hour has just flew by. So it's almost time to close. So let me pose a last question to both of you, which is kind of a holistic question. So to both of you, what do you think are the characteristics of a good leader? I will start from Takashima-san, and Scott will have the last word.
いろんな要素がありますけれども、私はやはりですね、一つは部下をですね、徹底的に鍛えるということだと思うんですね。そこから来ると思うんですが、鍛えて、私の好きな言葉にですね、厳しさは優しさであると。優しさは厳しさにはなり得ないという言葉があるんですが、ちょっと訳は難しいかも分かりませんが要するに優しいだけの指揮官、あるいは厳しいだけの指揮官だったら、それはまあやろうと思えばできます。だけど厳しい中に部下を大切に思う心を持っているということが、いざという時の適切なリーダーに指揮、あるいは統率に、日本では統率というんですけれども、指揮統率につながるのではないかというふうに思っております。厳しいだけでもいけないし、優しいだけだと、これはですね、下手をすれば自分の部下を死に至らしめることもあります。ただ優しいだけではダメなんですね、我々のリーダー論は。だから厳しいけれども優しい、そういう指揮官が私が理想とした指揮官でありましたけれども、なかなかうまくはいきませんでした。はい。
Thank you very much for that thoughtful reflection. Scott, you have the last word.
Okay, I'm going to take the opportunity to highlight something here before I actually answer that question. And I'll answer the question, I think, pretty succinctly. But the thing I'd like to highlight is the name Tomodachi. Although it took a disaster of immense magnitude, of severe impact, which impacts a lot of people, and a lot of unfortunate deaths, just that you couldn't have had a better name, more aptly named operation than Tomodachi. I mean, friendship. And it's a name that just continues on. And is if you say that, people understand what they mean. And I think that's it's very, very powerful. And we shouldn't let that be forgotten. And we should celebrate Tomodachi from that aspect. There's many great things that have evolved because of that. The U.S.-Japan Council with the embassy has created the Tomodachi Initiative, which is a great thing, a public-private venture that has tremendous sponsorship with companies like Honda that are just, allowing high school kids to be exposed between Japan and the United States culturally to what our two nations are all about and how valuable the alliance is. So I think we need to be mindful about the positive aspects that can come out of this, that can continue to strengthen our alliance, things like the Tomodachi Initiative and our relationships. To answer real quickly your question, and that is from a leadership perspective, and that is to listen and listen more. Delegate, get in the hands of your subordinates who are immensely capable, well-trained, the information that they need to make decisions and help you make a decision. And I think communicate, be a communicator. If your staffs, like we saw here in this crisis, if you communicate to your staffs, listen to them, give them the information they need, they'll go out and do great things. Look at Sendai, what happened there with our forces in clearing that airport and getting that back operational with our Marines and the Japan Self-Defense Forces in there. I mean, that's a story that is incredible there, the opening of the ports, things like that. And that's done because you have capable staffs that have been, you delegate to, you listen to, and you empower. And then finally, as a leader, you got to make decisions. You got to get armed with the best information you have and make the decisions that can allow your teams to operate and to really get down to really doing the work that needs to be done. So I just like to say I'm thankful for you all for doing this here today. It's great to see Takashima-san, and it's wonderful to see friends there. Hear from people in the audience like Admiral Keating and stuff. What a great forum this is, and I look forward to continuing to celebrate Tomodachi as we go forward.
Thank you, Scott. And then also another friend of ours, Lieutenant General Bert Field, said hi to both of you, who's in the audience.
Well, there's a hero of Tomodachi right there. What he did initially to get everything going, and then continued on there with coordinating all of us, herding all the cats. That was Bert, and he did a phenomenal job there. And I was remiss not mentioning his name earlier. So it's great to hear from him, because unbelievable work that Bert and his team did throughout this. And as I'm sure Takashima-san would echo.
Bert-san, I hope you're still in the audience to hear this. Anyway, I'm really sorry because of the time constraints. I only was able to get to half of the questions. There's still 10 or 11 questions hanging out, but we could go on and I'd easily have another hour. But for anything else for Takashima-san, it's getting into the 11 o'clock in the evening in Tokyo. So we don't want to intervene with his bedtime and disrupt his sleep. But thank you again. This is a wonderful conversation and great. What a great way to start this seminar series. So thank you both, Takashima-san and Scott, joining me this morning. Thank you, everyone, from chiming in, either from United States or Japan. And please do look forward to information on the second seminar that follows. But now I know that first one, as wonderful this is, second one is going to be a tough act to follow. So, but we look forward to organizing another one very, very soon. So thank you both again. And thank you, everyone, for joining.